Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All of our guests today, including John Shannon, standing by, brought to you by Delaney's OK Tire in Langley, in business for over 20 years. OK Tire, Canadian-owned, operated from coast to coast. Clayton and Brett Delaney are second-generation owners, and they handle all the major tire brands as well as custom wheels and suspension. Those demolition derby guys might want to go there. Leveling kits and lifts and full mechanical services. You can get your oil changed there, Rick.
Oh, big time.
Visit them at 19863 Fraser Highway in Langley as we bring in NHL analyst, co-host of the Bob McCown podcast, John Shannon. John, thanks for doing this, sir. How are you?
My pleasure. How can you talk about getting your oil change and say the words "big time"? I mean, I just don't get that, but that's okay. By the way, I am a little miffed. I am a little miffed today.
Yeah.
Ryan phoned and said, would you mind moving to Friday? I'm happy to move to Friday all the time. Friday's a good day for me. And I figured, it's the NFL draft. You got Roger Goodell coming on, or maybe Rick Tocchet. Drance. Thomas Drance.
Yeah.
You bumped me for Thomas Drance.
Yeah. It's in his contract, John. Might want to talk to your agent.
It's got to be a low in your career. It's got to be a low.
No, trust me, I've had lower. By the way, boys, we are live.
Yes.
We are live.
Okay.
We are live.
Thank you. What were the Leafs missing last night, John, as they lose to Tampa Bay and Toronto?
That's a great question. Really, I don't think it was as much the Maple Leafs as it was Tampa played a more sound game. The Maple Leafs have not played well this series. Even though they're up 3 games to do, I think you can look at the numbers, and I think you can look at a lot of the ebb and flow of the series and say Tampa has been the better team. I mean, Tampa could be up 3-2. Tampa might have won the series last night. That's how well they have played compared to the Maple Leafs. And that's, the measure of a great team is if you can still win when you play bad, and that's what the Maple Leafs have done. So now it's a little different story. Back to Tampa, and trust me, there's a few frayed nerves in Southern Ontario today.
Should they have dressed Michael Bunting?
I probably would have, but I wouldn't have played him where I would have played him on the 4th line. And the person that we talked about on our show taking out was Zach Aston Reese, and there it goes. And who'd the puck bounce off of to Nick Paul, but Zach Aston Reese. Not his fault. It was a fluke. But I think you have to put Bunting in, but you have to make sure he's controllable, and that becomes and then if you're the coach, is that an issue? I don't think it is for Sheldon. But when you go and win like they did, and Matt Nyes has been as good as he has been and made some pretty good defensive moves too, then you have to keep him in the lineup. So the question is, where does Bunting go? And to me, it's Zach Aston Reese.
John, I think we'd all agree Rick Bowness is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in the game of hockey. Last night, he was not happy that the Jets are the first team out. Talk about his short, terse press conference and what kind of summer awaits in Winnipeg.
59 seconds.
Yeah.
That's how long the press conference was. 59 seconds. And every word you could hang on because Rick, you're absolutely right, Rick, is one of the best people the game has ever produced. He's a great guy to have a conversation with, but he's been knocking his head against the wall since the All-Star break. They have had real issues. There has not been enough urgency. There has not been enough commitment. It's almost like this team, with some of the star players, realized they got to a point in the season, 15 games over 500, and they said, well, gosh, the season's not over, and we're tired. I'm not sure we have the commitment. And that really is what Rick's talking about, is having commitment to win. And it put them in a really tough spot. Connor Hellebuck, I think in the end played 69 games, including playoffs. That's too much.
Yeah.
You can't expect your goaltender to do that. 13 consecutive games to end the season, and then the 5 games in the playoffs. Too much. Yeah. So you could sense Rick's frustration. But he's 68 years old, and he's come to the point in his life, in my opinion, where he can say, listen, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you I'm mad. And if they don't like it, tough. And if they do like it, then there'll be changes.
John, let's go to Ottawa, where Ryan Reynolds and the Remington Group, maybe a bid of $1 billion. I think their value is at $700 or $800 million, but these numbers are crazy, and it's really good for the current owners of the Ottawa Senators.
Crazy,
yeah,
crazy. So Nashville sold for $880 million US dollars. The $1 billion, and when you look at the $1 billion that is being bantied about that Bruce Garriock had, that doesn't include building the new arena.
Yeah.
So how much is that? Is that another $700-800 million? So now we're talking a complete investment of close to $2 billion if the team is to move downtown. And quite frankly, I know it's a real estate play beyond the hockey team. I know it's a real estate play, but those are staggering numbers for a city of 1 million people. Yep. Staggering. So I don't know where it's going to end up. The Michael Landauer who's a minority owner of Montreal, I believe, was the front runner for the longest period of time. The Remington Group is a bunch of the Brady family out of Toronto. That's a huge real estate developer in Southern Ontario. They do have deep pockets, but they must have a vision of what the real estate play is going to be in downtown Ottawa versus what the hockey team is. The hockey team is in huge debt.
Yeah.
So part of that $1 billion is probably going to play, $300 to $400 million of debt that the Melnyk estate has to face up to. So it's not over yet, but I'm just amazed at the amount of money that people are talking about with this team.
Yep. You're going to miss the Saddle Dome, John? Speaking of new facilities?
Well, first of all, it's still 5 years away, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And I have a soft spot for the place, Donnie. As you know, I was living in Calgary at the time. I was part of the group when the shovels went in the ground that we designed all the broadcast issues for the building for the Calgary Olympics. I produced the first hockey game on television out of the building. I loved working in it. But if you look back, they did a renovation in the mid-90s that was, in my personal opinion, abysmal failure. And they never really recovered from it. And so the 40 years of the building being used is enough. It's time to move on. But I'm not still convinced that we're out of the dog days of the Saddle Dome at this point. We'll have to wait and see what happens in the provincial election in Alberta before we make the next step.
Yeah, good point. So we'll call Thomas, and we'll find out when we can fit you in next week, John. Yeah. So we'll get back to you on that, okay?
Well, no, listen, just tell Thomas that I'm so happy that he was accommodated. That's my job, is to make everybody else feel good.
Oh,
yeah. By the way, Ryan,
feel the love.
Line of the day. The line of the day is from Ryan.
Yeah.
Demolition derby. It's like a car accident. No kidding, pal.
No kidding.
Keep that up, and people might tune in. Ryan, thanks for this, John. We'll talk to you next week.
Have a good weekend, boys.
You bet.